Yes, I'm in my gown. Yes, I'm doing a video. So, a friend asked about the role that renewable energy could possibly play in resolving load shedding. And he asked things like, is the problem their intermittency? Um, uh, or is the problem that there's not enough grid for renewables? And why don't we just ditch the grid? Uh, Surely we must all be on the same grid, so we should all have load shedding at the same time. I guess he was talking about how different areas have different load shedding schedules. Um, and I think he just wanted to get at least my views on the energy crisis as it stands and the role or not for renewables. So I'll give it a try. And I'm always open and keen to hear any thoughts or inputs from yourself. Uh, if you're in the space or if you have some of your thoughts, regardless of whether you're in the space, I guess. So let's start with this. What are renewable energy technologies, right? So, renewable energy technologies are energy generation technologies that depend on natural resources, or rather renewable resources like the wind. We don't anticipate the wind running out, like the sun. We don't anticipate the sun running out, well, not in our time, and a few others. But in South Africa, the primary conversation now is about wind and solar. So if we think about generating power from a source like the sun is there during daylight hours. So there's an immediate, unavoidable intermittency, which is, it's not even half the day, like about 8 hours a day, maybe. You'll have sunshine, and the other 16 hours of the day you will not. And so you can only generate solar power, electricity in that time, once off. Okay? We're not going to talk about batteries and other forms of storing that power. So if you have a solar PV system, you can generate electricity from about 6 in the morning till about 5:30 or so in the day, right? And the peak of it is towards the middle of the day when the sun is really doing its thing. Now, the challenge we have with, let's just look at solar, is that our energy needs do not follow the sun. We are no longer in the Stone Age, right? I wake up 5:30 sometimes, and I put on my kettle, and I need my geyser to have hot water, and I need my Wi-Fi to be working. My gate needs to open if I'm going to the gym or whatever other loads. So there's needs in the morning, sometimes before sunrise. In the evening, we are cooking, we are washing our babies, we maybe want to take another shower, or whatever. We're heating our homes, we're watching TV, the Wi-Fi is still on. Maybe we turn on our electric fences or whatever, and so there's more need for electricity outside the sunny hours, right? So that is an inherent challenge with renewables, right? With solar specifically. Now, wind, on the other hand, as I understand, in South Africa generally blows a little bit better during the night. What happens at night? Let's say from 11 p.m. until 4 a.m. Great wind resource. Most of us, except Ditozi, are sleeping. So unless you're a heavy 24-hour shift industrial user, you're probably not using much energy during the night, right? But like I said, if you're a heavy industrial user, you still do need that electricity, right? So maybe the wind is good for you at that time. The amount of wind, we're not still there yet, right? So there's something called the demand, which is what us as a country require at a certain period of time, or a certain period of the day, right? That demand needs to be met. The thing with renewable energy is that we cannot tell it when to come on, and we do not like to tell it when to go off, right? That is, when the wind blows, we want to take that electricity because there's effectively a free source of electricity. The wind flows freely, right? So we can't really control that kind of energy source, but it is clean, it is good for us, and it's getting cheaper and cheaper. So what is it that we need, right? Well, before we started exploring renewables, we have, and we had, and still do have, coal-powered fire stations, right? Coal-fired power stations. Those are we are in full control of. You put in the coal at a certain rate, you keep the engine, the boiler burning, and well, you keep the furnace burning and boiling the water in the boiler, producing steam and creating electricity. But you control that. We put in the coal, we burn it, and we keep the turbines going, right? When we want more, there's a process to ramp that up so we can control how much generation we're getting out of those power stations. So that's what we've generally heard being referred to as baseload, which is those systems like to run constantly, right? They don't like to change gears. Once they're into their high gear, they like to stay there, and we just keep feeding them coal. And that's why sometimes when it's bad weather and it's rainy, the coal gets wet. Then we have problems because now we can't keep the systems running at the same pace. We have to drop down a specific amount, which means we don't have enough electricity being generated. And then sometimes that can affect, cause load shedding, right? But anyway, these systems like running at the same pace, right? We can up and down them as needs be, but they generally prefer to run at the same level, right? So that's what is referred to as this base load. It just stays consistent. The beauty of base load is many things, right? Is that it keeps the grid stable. Things are running at the same pace. There's a good frequency throughout the grid, and there's a minimum demand that as a country we always have. So even when I go to sleep, some of my plugs are working, my fridge is working, my geysers is running. If I have an electric fence, that's going on. The street lights are going on. Like I said, big industrial users like smelters and other manufacturing processes, they're still running. And the street lights, office lights, those are going. So there's a base amount of demand that never goes off, right? And the beauty of base load is that it covers that, right? And then we can add on other technologies like gas powers, peaking power plants, or diesel power plants that can ramp up. So as we wake up and I switch on my kettle and my neighbor switches on my kettle and my other neighbor's geyser timer goes on and his geyser starts going on, that increasing demand can then be met by turning on maybe other units in the power station to say, okay, we've been running at this level, we now need you to go up to this level, right? And we can kind of follow that load, right? And it's that dispatchability is I switch you on and you can give me a certain output. That's a dispatchability that let's say power generation technologies that we can control enable us to do, right? Renewables, like I said, we cannot turn them on or turn them off, right? So when we all wake up and the morning peak goes up, maybe the sun is still rising, so it rises at whatever pace it rises at. Maybe that day is a cloudy day, so we can't really choose, okay? And so those are some of the inherent challenges, I think, with renewable energy technologies, right? The challenge with, I think, fossil fuel technologies is, as we know, issues around coal mining. If I make that example, the environmental and health challenges with coal mining itself, the health and environmental challenges with carbon emissions into the atmosphere, and I think a global compact that we have all bought into. And so there's a need to move away from those kinds of technologies. And that is what is effectively the energy transition that we need to go on, which is, as we move away from this technology paradigm of coal-fired power stations to renewable energy systems. One, how do we move in a way that ensures we still have the energy security, right? Which is partly a matter of we are able to control our energy and meet our demands per time, as well as ensure that all the economic value chains that we've built around coal over, I think, probably hundreds of years now, we can reimagine those into a new energy paradigm, which is primarily based on renewable energy and other clean energy technologies. Right now, if we go to the issue of load shedding, for example, right now at 10 o'clock, I'm going to have load shedding. There's no sun at this time, so we cannot depend on solar energy unless we have batteries, right? So that adds another system cost and another technology requirement. Maybe the wind is pumping, maybe it's not. That is also another factor. We cannot determine how much wind is being produced at the time that we need it. Okay, so what does that mean for a technology like wind? Is that we probably have to, let's say we want 1 gigawatt of wind capacity throughout the night, right? We probably don't install 1 gigawatt. We probably need maybe 2, maybe 3 gigawatts, so that what is called capacity factor is that when the wind isn't producing at its peak and is producing somewhere a little bit lower than that, the cumulative capacity that is available meets the demand that we need. So there's an overspec that we need to build, an overbuild that we need to put in place so that the resulting net output meets the requirement. And it's a similar thing with the solar PV system, right? If you want to be able to produce 2 kilowatt peak at a certain point in time, maybe let's say in the middle of the day, you're not going to install a 2 kilowatt peak system. You might install a bigger one, so that either you know you're going to hit that 2 kilowatt peak even if the sun isn't at its best, or you can hit that 2 kilowatt system level for a longer period of time. So there's a design consideration with renewables, which is a different paradigm to coal-powered power stations. Now, with load shedding, we're basically having to meet demand with a limited amount of supply, right? And so that is when Eskom decides to reduce the demand in different areas, because we need to one, we can't switch off the whole country, so some of the system still needs to be working. So they pick different areas to reduce the demand, and that's why today I'll have load shedding from 10 until 11:30, and then next week it's the guys across the road, so that we share the load reduction, so to speak. So when you think about load shedding, purely and solely about load shedding, and you think, well, how can renewables directly help reduce that? I think it's not a simple one-for-one reduction. It's not a matter of, oh, let's install all the renewables that we can and then we will not have load shedding. It's not a one-for-one. It's more a matter of, with more renewable generation capacity that we have during the day and at night, there is less reliance on on the coal-fired power stations, and those would then be able to run at a lower requirement, and hopefully some of those units can then get maintained, or they don't need to get run as hard as they're being run now, and so they're less prone to breakdowns, right? It's like saying you have two cars, one is slightly newer, and you have another that is older, and you now use the newer one a little bit more so that you don't run the old one harder, right? It's a very weak analogy, but that's the idea. And there are other considerations as well, which is, the price of renewables now much cheaper, so from a system perspective, I think cumulatively we're going to start seeing those benefits. There's environmental consideration as well, and there's the hard fact, unfortunate or not, but there's a hard fact that global funding institutions have generally moved away from funding fossil fuel generation technologies. So we would be hard pressed to find international funding for and support for more coal-fired power stations. I think I'll leave it there. If there are questions or points of clarity or things where I have fumbled, please feel free to comment. Drop me a message, and if there are areas that maybe you'd want me to go into more detail on, I'm down for it. And yes, I'm in my gown.